Welcome to ABC, Adult Bible and Catechism, a summer 2020 offering of faith formation by Good Shepherd Lutheran Church. It's a series of weekly presentations that will aid you in your understanding of the Lutheran Christian faith and how it affects the way you see life through the lens of faith in Jesus Christ. Thanks for joining us again this week. Let's begin with this week's presentation.
Well, welcome back to our ABCs, our Adult Bible and Catechism, and today we're going to be looking at a little bit of political intrigue, if you like political intrigue and mystery, and the study of power you will like today, because we are going to talk about the history of the promise given to Abraham, that God would make of him a great people, he'd give him a land, and he'd give him a nation. We left off at the end of the 5 books of the Pentateuch, with Moses dying as they stood on this threshold of this promised land. And they have the people. God has given them the law that defines them as God's people, as God's nation. And now they need to go to the land. So, on the promised land, as the one who brings them into the promised land is Joshua, the one who had been Moses' lieutenant. He was one of the few that was faithful and trusted that God would get them through. So after 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, the only 2 left from that generation that came out of slavery are Joshua and Caleb. Joshua becomes the leader. And when you read the book of Joshua, you find out that the conquest and division of the land that happened. And we find that in Joshua, God is the commander-in-chief. It is God to whom they look for their direction and how to take over the land. Joshua is God's general. He's the one that relays the instruction. And at the end, we have a united Israel that comes out of the conquest. Even though each tribe has their own area, they are united as one nation. And in this book, the conquest is swift and complete. One of the troubling things in Joshua is that they are told to basically wipe out all the people that are there, that God has prepared this land for them. And it sounds, kind of today we deal with a jihad, but a holy war. But God knew, as we'll see very soon, that these people who were there would tempt God's people. And the idea was, if they were the only ones there, drive them out. But yet greed and we're not quite sure what comes, they don't do it. But God gives them the land anyway. And the minute they cross the River Jordan and step into the promised land, the manna from heaven is finished, and they must learn to live off the land. So once this happens, we have the judges of Israel. The book of Judges comes up. And judges are God-sent rescuers of Israel. And this happens for about 200 years. And the idea is that God is their leader. God is their king. But remember I said just a little bit ago that the people that were left would lead the people astray? Well, we get something called the ABCD cycle. We have here A, apostasy. Apostasy means the people would turn away from God. They would be told by the local people that, that was back in Egypt. This, around here we have these gods called Baals, and they help us to take care of the land. So you have to worship the Baals. You can worship many gods, but guess what? God's a jealous God. So God would say, okay, fine. You guys go off on your own, and I'm going to let you get beat up. And we have the Philistines, the Amalekites, everybody, when they see that Israel is weak, they come in and pick on them. So guess what the people do? They call out for help. They cry out to God for help. Oh, God, we didn't mean it. We really didn't mean it. Please come back, deliver us. And they would have deliverance from a judge. And you might be familiar with some of the stories of Samson and Gideon and Jehoshaphat, all of these, Deborah and Barak, all of these great stories for Sunday school. But the minute you see in this cycle, the minute the judge dies, the people go back looking for something new. And keep in mind this cycle because it continues throughout the rest of the Bible. So by the end of Judges, you have this idea of kind of harassment and adjustment as the people adjust to the new land. They are supposed to continue to create better unity among the tribes, but there's many stories of sibling disobedience, let's call it. They are to establish continuity of rule. By having these judges, they seem to continue to, the minute the judge dies, they fall back. So maybe they need their own king. And they need to maintain the purity of their faith. Worship only God. God had warned them in the law, the Ten Commandments. I am a jealous God, so don't go looking for other gods. So the next book we have is the book of Samuel. Samuel is that transition from the judges to the time of the prophets. Samuel, we find out, is dedicated to God even before he's born. In fact, his mother sings a beautiful song of how her son will be for the redeeming of the world, for the justice to come into the world. A song we'll hear about 1,000 years later, sung by another young woman. Samuel is a great leader. He listens to God. He has this great call story. He's constantly on task for God. But as he gets older, it's discovered that his sons are just about as bad as some of the previous leaders. So the people want a king. They cry out and they say, you know what we really need is a king, someone who represents God to us in person here on earth. And just like all of our neighbors, we want a king. So Samuel goes to God and says, here's what they want. And God says, don't worry about it, Samuel. They're rejecting me, not you. But I tell you what, here, you got to give them a warning. They have to realize that with a king is going to tax them. A king is going to be power hungry and go off to war. And a king is going to be greedy. A king is going to demand a lot from you. And just give them that warning. Samuel gives them the warning. They say, no, we understand. We want a king. So the first king called is from the tribe of Benjamin, and that is Saul. And Saul lasts as king for 20 years. He proves to be not as good. He looked really good on paper, but proves not to be quite so good. And in 1 Samuel, by the end of 1 Samuel, we see the rise up of David. David is anointed by Samuel. He's the youngest son of Jesse, but he is said to have the heart of God. God says, don't look on the outside, look on the inside. So by the end of 1 Samuel, we have David rising to the throne. And in 2 Samuel, we have David become king. First 7 years, he is king just of Judah. The last 30 some odd years, he is king of the united kingdom. All of the tribes unite behind David. As I said, he has God's heart. He has this heart of faithfulness. David is judged as such a great king because he centralizes the capital at Jerusalem. That way everybody shares now the same capital. He also centralizes worship at Jerusalem. He brings the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. And he's so happy with God, he promises he's going to build God a house. But God says, David, you are not to build me a house, but I will build for you a house, a dynasty. So we have a promise given to David that his offspring will always sit on the throne. But we also find out that David is very human, and we have some very interesting stories of an illicit affair and some dysfunction in the family. But David remains faithful. David even gets to experience how God probably felt when David was unfaithful, when David's own sons are unfaithful. So by the end of 2 Samuel, David is an old man, and we go into then 1st and 2nd Kings. And a younger son of David, Solomon, is made king. And the 1st and 2nd Kings goes from the reign of Solomon to the end of the kingdoms. And I say kingdoms because the kingdoms divide after Solomon. So there's 40 years of Solomon, 40 years of David, 20 years of Saul. For 100 years, there's the golden age of Israel. But by the end, things start to fall apart. And Solomon's son does not succumb to the people because Solomon has done the very same things that they were warned about. He has taxed the people heavily. He's put them almost under slavery and bondage again. So we have two kingdoms now. The northern kingdom, the 10 tribes from the north, from 922 to 722, for about 200 years, form what's called this northern kingdom, or Israel. They've proved to be on a main trade route. They have a lot of interaction with other nations, and ultimately the Syrians come and take them away. Hence the 10 lost tribes of Israel. And they are warned by their prophets. So many of the books of the prophets are addressed to the nation of Israel. The others are addressed to the nation of Judah, the southern kingdom, from 922 to 597 BCE. And part of the craziness of 1st and 2nd Kings is you go back and forth. You get a little dizzy because the timing is always based on the reference, the beginning of a new kingdom, or the end of a kingdom. And you go back and forth, but God remains faithful. And we see Israel and Judah kind of have this co-relative dating relationship. They hang out together sometimes, and other times they're very angry at each other and fight against each other. They become vassal states. There are good kings and there are bad kings. And then there's another book called 1st and 2nd Chronicles. This tells the story a little differently. It gives you the genealogies of Adam all the way up to the exile, because even the southern kingdom, Judah, goes into exile in Babylon eventually. It talks about David's reign, Solomon's reign. The history goes from David's monarchy to the exile. And there again, David is the reference point for all of the kings of the northern and the southern kingdom, because they are judged on, do they keep worship in Jerusalem, is the capital in Jerusalem, and do they follow God's favor? So there again, we have this story of family history. Now, something interesting, each of the kings has a prophet. The prophet is God's messenger to the king. The God delivers his messages to the kings through the prophets. And one of the things you'll notice here is both kingdoms have 19 kings. In Israel, there are 19 kings, but there are 9 different houses, 9 different families or dynasties that sit on the throne. And about the quickest way to become king was through assassination in Israel. So there's not a lot of stability in the northern kingdom. And the prophets talk to us about this. And when you read a prophet, make sure you know which kingdom he's talking to. And is it early in the reign? Is it as they're approaching going into exile? Or is the prophet giving them hope of what is to come? But God is constant. But in the southern kingdom, in Judah, there's 19 kings, 1 queen. But David's descendant is always, always on the throne. So whether you're in Kings or Chronicles, God is constant in the face of all this human upheaval. And those themes, the themes that the prophets bring, they bring a warning to tell the people to look around, look what you're doing. You are judged by how you care for your poor, your orphaned, your widowed, those who are the bottom of society. How you care for them is how God judges you. And this idea of repentance, to turn back to God. When people would turn away from God and look again to those foreign gods, our ABCD cycle, they would be warned, turn back, face God again, be true to God. And their stories, even their dire predictions. And the thing is a prophet is successful if his message is heeded and the people turn back. Prophets are not saying this is absolutely positively going to happen, except a little later on. Jeremiah and Isaiah do a little bit of that. But the people are always given a chance. And even though they are told, yes, this is going to happen because you have not heeded God's warning, God always gives them hope. He says a remnant will always remain. So through this time, we see God as a constant. We see humanity trying to flex its power, some doing well, others not doing well. But as you read these books, I invite you to see how it is God is inviting his people to be defined by his law, to be his nation, and to be the ones that God will bless the world with. That's it for today. More to come. The story continues.